Responsibility often sounds serious. It sounds like something adults should want, something that proves maturity. But when responsibility actually shows up, the feeling is often different. You notice it when a decision lands in your hands. No one else to decide, no one else to blame, just you. The room feels quieter. Responsibility means that what happens next depends on you. If things work out, you did that. If they don't, that's also on you. That weight arrives quickly. You might delay the decision, you might look for more information, you might ask others what they think, even when you already know what you want to do. Not because you are careless, because responsibility feels exposing. When someone else is responsible, mistakes feel lighter. They belong somewhere else. When you are responsible, mistakes feel personal. You notice how tempting it is to step back, to wait, to let time decide, to let circumstances decide. Responsibility asks you to stand behind your choice, to own the outcome even if it's unclear or imperfect. That's uncomfortable. Avoiding responsibility doesn't always look like running away. Sometimes it looks like staying busy. Sometimes it looks like saying yes to everything so nothing is fully yours. Sometimes it looks like waiting for permission that never comes. You tell yourself you're being careful, or realistic, or patient. But underneath, there is often a quieter feeling, a wish for distance, a wish for less weight. Responsibility makes things real. It turns ideas into actions. It turns possibilities into consequences. And consequences are harder to carry than thoughts. You might notice how relief appears when responsibility shifts away from you, when someone else takes charge, when a rule decides, when a system decides. The tension eases, the pressure drops, you can breathe again. That relief doesn't mean you hate responsibility. It means you feel the cost of it. Responsibility asks you to commit without guarantees, to move forward without knowing how things will turn out. That's a lot to hold. So you hesitate, you delay, you soften your involvement, not because you don't care, but because responsibility makes you visible, and being visible feels risky. That's often where avoidance begins. Carl Jung paid close attention to the moments when people step away from owning something inside themselves. Responsibility, for Jung, was never just about action. It was about facing what those actions reveal. Taking responsibility means admitting that your choices come from you, not from fate, not from others, not from circumstance alone. Jung would say that this is where discomfort begins. When responsibility appears, the inner world becomes harder to ignore. Doubts surface, fears surface. Parts of the self that feel unsure or unprepared step forward. Jung believed people often avoid responsibility because it brings these parts into the light. Responsibility forces a meeting with the self. If something goes wrong, you can't easily push it away. You have to look at your judgment, your limits, your blind spots. That kind of self-contact can feel threatening. Jung would notice how quickly the mind tries to protect itself from this exposure. It looks for reasons. It looks for explanations that move the weight outward. Someone else influenced the decision. The timing was wrong. The situation was impossible. These explanations aren't lies, they are shields. Jung called this avoidance of the shadow. Responsibility brings shadow qualities closer. Fear, doubt, weakness, and uncertainty all become harder to deny. For many people, it feels safer to avoid responsibility than to face those traits. Responsibility also challenges the image people hold of themselves. Jung believed that people work hard to maintain a stable sense of who they are. Being responsible means risking failure, and failure threatens that image. If you avoid responsibility, you avoid that risk. Jung would say this is not about laziness, it's about self-preservation. The psyche wants to stay intact. It wants to avoid inner conflict, so responsibility gets delayed, shared, softened, pushed away. The relief that comes from avoiding responsibility is not accidental. It is the relief of not having to confront uncomfortable parts of the self. Jung would see this pattern clearly. The more responsibility threatens the inner balance, the stronger the urge to escape it. Avoidance becomes a way to stay comfortable with who you think you are. And until the self feels strong enough to face its own uncertainty, responsibility will continue to feel like something to step away from rather than step into. Friedrich Nietzsche saw responsibility as something heavier than people like to admit, not because it is unfair, but because it demands strength. Responsibility means you cannot hide behind excuses. You cannot blame tradition, rules, or other people. You acted, you chose, you stand behind it. Nietzsche would notice how uncomfortable that feels. When you take responsibility, you give up the safety of saying, "It wasn't my fault." You accept that your choices come from you, along with their consequences. That acceptance can feel like a burden. Nietzsche believed many people avoid responsibility because it strips away comforting stories. Stories about being unlucky, about being forced, about having no real choice. Responsibility interrupts those stories. It demands honesty about desire, motive, and weakness. It asks you to admit that you wanted something, chose something, or avoided something. Nietzsche would say this is where resentment often appears. When people feel unable to carry responsibility, they begin to dislike those who do. Responsibility starts to look arrogant, dangerous, unnecessary. Avoiding responsibility then feels justified. Nietzsche would notice how people prefer roles that allow them to obey rather than decide. Following orders feels lighter than giving them. Carrying out instructions feels safer than creating direction. Responsibility requires standing alone at times. It means acting without approval. It means risking failure without protection. That kind of independence demands inner strength. Nietzsche believed not everyone wants that task. Not because they are incapable, but because it is exhausting. Responsibility keeps asking for more clarity, more courage, more ownership. Avoidance becomes a way to rest. By stepping away from responsibility, people protect themselves from constant self-examination. They reduce the pressure to define themselves through action. Nietzsche would say responsibility is avoided not because it is wrong, but because it reveals too much. It shows where you stand, what you value, and how strong you are willing to be. When that exposure feels threatening, withdrawal feels sensible. So responsibility gets labeled as stressful, as unfair, as something to delay. Nietzsche would recognize this as a quiet trade, less responsibility in exchange for less strain. It's not cowardice, it's fatigue. And until strength feels available again, responsibility will continue to feel like a weight better left untouched. Niccolo Machiavelli would not ask whether people should take responsibility. He would look at what happens when responsibility is avoided. When responsibility is unclear, systems benefit. If no one fully owns a decision, blame spreads out. Consequences become softer. Mistakes dissolve into process. That keeps things stable. Machiavelli would notice how responsibility is often designed to be shared, delayed, or pushed upward. Not by accident, but because full ownership creates risk. When someone takes responsibility, they also gain power. They can change things. They can challenge structures. That can be disruptive. Avoiding responsibility keeps power contained. Machiavelli would observe that people are more manageable when they feel involved but not accountable. They participate, but they don't decide. They act, but they don't own outcomes. This arrangement feels safer for everyone involved. Responsibility creates friction. It forces decisions. It forces consequences. It forces someone to stand visibly behind an action. Avoidance removes that friction. Machiavelli would see how systems reward those who stay flexible, agreeable, and uncommitted. These people adapt easily. They don't cause trouble. They don't draw attention. Those who take responsibility stand out. They become targets for praise and blame. Both carry risk, so avoidance becomes practical. Machiavelli would not call this moral failure. He would call it strategy. When responsibility is dangerous, avoiding it becomes sensible. Structures survive by distributing responsibility thinly. When everyone is a little responsible, no one is fully responsible. That protects the system. It also protects the people inside it. They feel less exposed, less at risk, less accountable. Machiavelli would notice how language helps with this. Phrases that soften ownership, decisions that appear inevitable, outcomes described as collective. All of this reduces personal responsibility. And when responsibility feels risky, people willingly step back. They accept distance. They accept roles that don't require ownership. From the outside, it looks like apathy. From the inside, it feels like self-preservation. Machiavelli would understand that responsibility is not avoided because people don't care. It is avoided because caring comes with cost. And systems tend to favor what keeps them running quietly. Responsibility threatens that quiet, so it is shared, delayed, dissolved. And in that space, avoidance feels not only easier, but smart. Napoleon Hill paid close attention to what helps people keep moving forward without losing confidence. Responsibility, for many, interrupts that sense of forward motion. Taking responsibility means accepting uncertainty. You act without knowing the result. You commit without guarantees. Hill would notice how easily that weakens confidence. Belief steps in to soften this. When responsibility feels heavy, belief offers reassurance. The idea that things will work out, that someone else will step in, that the outcome will make sense later. Hill would not rush to question these beliefs. He would notice how helpful they feel. Belief reduces the pressure to act decisively. It allows people to delay responsibility while still feeling hopeful. It replaces ownership with optimism. That feels lighter. Responsibility demands focus and discipline. Belief allows comfort and patience. Hill understood how attractive that trade can be. When people believe that circumstances will improve on their own, responsibility feels less urgent. Action can wait. Decisions can be postponed. This doesn't feel like avoidance. It feels like trust. Hill would see how belief protects people from fear. Fear of failure, fear of being wrong, fear of being judged. Belief tells you that you're on the right path even if you haven't chosen one clearly yet. That reassurance calms anxiety. Hill believed that confidence matters more than precision for many people. Responsibility requires precision. Belief allows flexibility. So belief becomes a resting place, a way to stay emotionally stable without committing fully. Hill would notice how often people mistake belief for strength. It feels positive, it feels constructive, it feels safe. But underneath, it often delays responsibility rather than replaces it. Still, Hill wouldn't condemn this. He would understand the need behind it. People want to feel supported as they move through uncertainty. Responsibility feels like standing alone. Belief feels like being held. So people lean into belief when responsibility feels too exposed. They tell themselves they're waiting for the right moment, the right sign, the right conditions. That waiting feels calm, and as long as belief provides comfort, responsibility can stay just out of reach. Most of the time, we already know this. We just don't like hearing it said.